Traffic accidents, frequently asked questions. If you have questions about vehicle insurance, proof, and fault, we have the answers for you. How do you work out who is at fault in a vehicle accident? It's not always easy to work out who was at fault for a vehicle accident, especially as it depends on who was careless. There is a set of rules that tell people how they are required to drive, and it also provides some guidelines that help those responsible to work out how liability is measured. A violation of the traffic rules may make it obvious as to who is at fault, for example, when a car driver goes through a stop sign and crashes into another car. In situations when there was no obvious violation, such as when two drivers merge into the same lane of traffic, it is not quite so obvious as to who may be responsible or negligent for the accident. The cyclist or driver who is found to be most at fault could be found negligent. To prove that someone has been found negligent, there are 3 elements that have to be met. 1. Every driver is legally required to be careful when they are on the road, and to use caution every time they are driving. 2. The driver was not careful. 3. The driver's conduct caused the damage to another vehicle or injury to another person. Could I be found responsible for an accident if my car is rear-ended? If your car is rear-ended, the driver of the vehicle is likely to be found at fault, irrespective of the reason why you stopped. All drivers are required to stop safely if another vehicle stops ahead of you. If you were unable to stop, it's very likely that you were not driving as safely as you should have been. If a car's front end hits the rear of your car and both end up damaged, there will be no doubt that you were hit from the rear. If a car that was traveling behind you is hit by a car behind them and pushes into you, the driver of the third car will be at fault. You will need to file a claim against their insurance. Is the car that makes a left turn at fault in an accident? It's likely that a car that made a left turn is usually liable to a car that is coming in the opposite direction. However, there are some exceptions to this rule. The car that was traveling straight ahead was traveling too fast. The car that was traveling straight went through a red light. The car that was making a left turn started to turn when it was safe, but something occurred and it had to stop turning or slow down. The law states that the car that's making a left-hand turn must wait until it is completely safe to make the turn before it moves in front of traffic. The damage to the car and its specific location can make it hard for another driver to argue that the accident occurred in any other way. This means that if you ran into someone while they were making a left-hand turn, the driver of the other vehicle is very likely to be found liable. Who is to blame if one of the victims of the accident was at fault? If the actions of a victim are at least partly to blame for the accident, the compensation for the damages and injuries could be very limited or completely barred, but this just depends on where the accident took place. In the states that have the comparative negligence system, if it is found that both parties were negligent, the fault will be allocated. This means that a victim will only get partial compensation. In the states that have the contributory negligence system, if it is found that the driver and the victim are negligent, the victim will not receive any money. This is the way that the system works, but the good news is that only a few states use contributory negligence. If a motorcyclist was not wearing a helmet, can they still receive compensation for injuries that were caused by someone else? If a motorcyclist was not wearing a helmet, their ability to receive compensation for their neck and head injuries will depend on where the accident occurred, and whether wearing a helmet is required by law. Every single state apart from 3 of them has a motorcycle helmet law. In some states, motorcyclists must wear helmets. In some states, helmets only need to be worn if you are under a specific age. In every state that has a helmet law, if a motorcyclist was injured and was not wearing a helmet, it may be impossible to receive compensation. However, the motorcyclist could receive compensation for the other injuries they suffer from. In the states that do not require people to wear a helmet, it may be easier to receive compensation for their injuries. However, their insurance company may produce a lot of evidence to show that wearing a helmet can reduce the likelihood of head injuries and that the motorcyclist was negligent by not wearing one. If I was involved in a trucking accident, who can I hold liable? If you were involved in a trucking accident and you were the victim, you need to work out who may be responsible, but it may be complicated. There can be a lot of people who could be found liable, These people include the truck driver, the trailer or truck's owner, the company or the individual who leased the trailer or truck, the truck or tires manufacturer, or any other equipment that might have caused or contributed to the accident or its severity, the freight loader or shipper of the truck. Leasing, hauling, and trucking companies tend to argue with each other about who will be compensating the victim. One of the best things you can do is to contact a lawyer as soon as possible, particularly one who has a lot of experience with vehicle accidents. Who is at fault is a car and bike collide. In nearly every state, bicycles are considered to be vehicles, and this means that every cyclist legally has to follow the same rules that apply to other vehicles on the road. If an accident occurred between a bicycle and a car, the fault is usually determined by the principles of negligence. This means that even though a bicycle is a much smaller vehicle, the cyclist could still be at fault. What to do if you are involved in an accident? One of the most important things you can do when you are involved in an accident is to make sure that you document everything that occurred. Taking notes can help you to remember what had happened, and it can make the process a lot easier, helping you to get the compensation you deserve. Make a note as soon as you have the chance, and mention what you were doing before the accident, where you were traveling to, and who you were with. You should also mention what time of the day or night it was, and what the weather was like. Include every single detail about what you heard, felt, and saw. If there were any witnesses, you should make a note of everything they said. You will also need to make a note of all of your injuries, how they affected you, how much discomfort you are in, and any pain and suffering you are experiencing. You should also make a note of any other problems that may not be obvious, such as other injuries, but symptoms that could help you get more compensation.